oh my God, I've forgotten how to be creative. And that's how I start most of my projects. Now, to an outsider, the creative process can seem daunting, mysterious, but I assure you from the inside, it can feel daunting and mysterious. So today I'm wearing my composer's hat and I'm going to let you in on a few of my secrets. As a freelancer, I take on all kinds of projects. So this is a real-life song commission, and I'm going to share how I get from the idea to the finished product, from the brief to the final mix. It's not the only way to do things, but there might be some tips you can borrow. Hi, I'm Scott. You're watching the channel for all things musical theatre. If that sounds like your bag, you know what to do. Subscribe, all the stuff. Now, people assume creativity is all about inspiration, but inspiration is unreliable. That's where we turn to technique. And while writing of any kind is not an exact science, techniques can be learned. And ironically, the better your technique, the more intuitive it feels, which takes us full circle back to touchy-feely. Now, you might make very different choices to me, which is as it should be, but as long as you understand how I arrived at those choices, you might adapt some of these techniques for your own work. And even for performers, some insight into the material might help you interpret it easier, better. So I start every project with what I call the givens, concrete, definable parameters. And some are imposed by others, in this case a writer who sent me some lyrics, and some are imposed by me as I refine the idea. But it all starts with the brief. So, first set of givens, I have a set of lyrics and the writer wants me to compose and record a song. So immediately I know I'm not thinking about sheet music, a piano and vocal arrangement. I'm thinking in terms of orchestration for recording, because that's what I'm handing over at the end. Now, I've worked with the writer before, so we don't have a formal contract. But after our briefing, I email everything we've discussed, so there's a record of it. If you'd like me to go further into contracts, leave me a comment. And a big thank you to Kathleen McLennan for permission to share her lyrics. Now, the crucial things at this stage are budget, time frame, use, and deliverables. And I know, not very sexy, not very creative, but they actually tell me a lot. For instance, the budget is small, which means that everything has to be done in-house. So I'm composing, orchestrating, performing, recording, mixing. And because I'm also singing, everything has to be in my key. So another set of givens. Or the time frame, which is flexible, and that determines some of the scope of the project, what we can achieve on this budget. Now, it's not open-ended, but it does give me time to mull over things, which I'll talk about shortly. Because if you want something fast, yes, I could drop everything and turn it around tomorrow for a price, but it's not going to be well considered, and you can't have both. But in this case, I don't have to settle for my first idea. I have time to think it through, and that's a win for both of us. Kathleen gets a more polished track, and I don't feel like I've compromised the idea for the budget. I don't feel like I've had to cut corners. Then there's the rights, which can be complex, but we keep it simple. Because I'm the producer, it's assumed that I own the recording, so I license it to Kathleen for non-commercial use. So for CV, submitting to songwriting competitions, etc. But if either of us want to sell it, profit from it, that'll be subject to a separate agreement. So we keep this one simple. And finally, to fulfill the contract, I'm delivering a stereo digital audio file. So no surround sound, no multiple masters for, Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube, etc. It's one mix, one file. And with these givens, this framework, I can tackle the material. Now, I always write down my first impressions. It doesn't matter what it is, it's really anything that comes to mind. Does it move me in some way? Is there anything distinctive about the lyrics, the rhythms, the imagery? Does it remind me of anything, a particular style or something from history, literature, or movies even? And in this case, I have an idea for a melody which I jot down. Now, I may never use it, but it's there if I need a fresh set of eyes or ears. Now, the narrative of the song is based on a legend about sea kelpies that lure men to their deaths. Spoiler alert. So I'm thinking, okay, a bit of drama, possibly Celtic folk feel, which suggests maybe simple chord progressions, uncluttered harmony. So I write that down as well. But with 4 verses and 4 choruses, I'll need to overcome that repetitive structure so it doesn't feel predictable. So note to self. And the lyrics fall into a 1-2-3 pattern, so it suggests a 3-4 time. But I immediately noticed 2 more challenges. Every line of the lyrics fills an entire 4-bar phrase, so there's really nowhere to breathe, which is fine in poetry because you can pause, but not so easy for a singer with a set tempo. I also noticed that the verse and chorus share an identical lyric structure, so I'm going to have to find some musical solution to distinguish one from the other, again, to avoid that sense of repetition. And this is not a criticism of the writer, this is me taking note of what I need to bring to the table. Because in this instance, it's not up to me to make value judgments on the lyrics in the way that maybe I might if we were collaborating on a musical. But this song is entirely self-contained, it has no other context, so I don't need to reference something else. But what I love about the song is its clear narrative, because every verse has a purpose and it takes us somewhere new, and that's something I can use, as you'll see as we go on. So even without a note of music so far, I have a number of concrete tasks that don't rely on me waiting for inspiration. But now it's back to Kathleen for some creative clarity. What kind of folk sound do we need? Authentic, traditional, Celtic folk sounds, ethereal Enya-esque synth pop, epic Hollywood film score, or even a Brigadoon-style romanticised folk. Unfortunately, Kathleen's really decisive. No, none of the above. I'm shattered. No, I'm not really shattered because she says two things that really steer me in the right direction. First, she says the Kelpies were originally from Cornwall's mythology. Okay, so very specific reference. I can use that. Then she says, and the songs probably relied on a sailor with a button concertina or a flute or small instruments they might have on a boat. So this gives me an idea for orchestration, but it also tells me something about Kathleen's expectation of what she wants to hear. Very helpful. And at the end of the conversation, she says, look, tweak it as much as possible. I'd be very happy with a Scott Cameron original. That's me, by the way. So that gives me some latitude. She knows I focus on the storytelling aspect of music, so that's how I'm approaching it. So with these givens, I can start composing. I mentioned mulling over things earlier, and I rarely write down musical lyrics straight away. I like to let them kind of steep for a while, days, weeks. But if they stick, then I keep them. If I forget them, then they weren't good enough. I call that creative brutalism. There's a technique for you. So as I mull, my original melody keeps coming back to me, so there must be something in it. But the first two lines are just boring. I mean, they're dead boring. So I give them a bit more rise and fall. And that kind of feels a bit better. I mean, is that intuition? Is that technique? Don't know. But with this kind of folk music, my basic chord structure is first, fourth, and fifth chords. But I deviate from that with some passing notes, extended chords, and even some parallel movement outside of the key, just for a bit more colour. And because the verse starts on the tonic, a very stable chord, I end it on an unresolved chord, which gives us momentum back into the next verse, or pulls us into the chorus, which we'll get to shortly. So now I tackle my structural problem from earlier. The white horse in the chorus isn't mentioned until the second verse. So that first chorus is going to feel preemptive. So I drop that first chorus. So we're starting with two verses, which breaks up our structure a little bit, makes it a little bit less predictable, but also works for story. I solve my second problem of breathing by adding an extra measure between each phrase of the first verse. So now we're using 5-bar phrases. But because I leave the second verse as it was in 4-bar phrases, it feels like it starts to gather momentum, even though the tempo is exactly the same. It might not be something you're conscious of, but you'll feel it. And for my third problem, I make the chorus twice as long as the verse. This does two things. It feels more expansive, which works for the song, but also means I can break it up into smaller chunks so the rhythm feels different to the verse. And the singer can breathe. Now the first words of the chorus are very active, ride the white horse, so I want to give it some lift. So instead of starting grounded on the tonic like in the verse, I keep it unresolved on the fourth. Then we move to the fifth, then finally resolve back to the first. And I can repeat this for the next line as well. And there's one more decision I make before I start orchestrating. I had planned to end the song with a double chorus and a key change into that final chorus. But when I look at the lyrics, I think that'll just feel too overblown, too triumphant, and I'd rather be true to the lyrics. So I drop that final chorus and I go small instead, and you'll see what I did when we get to orchestration. Now, part of a composer's job is to add something to the music, something beyond face value. And orchestration brings yet another layer of character, intensity, and imagery, not just through extra lines of melody or counterpoint, but through instrumental textures and density of sound. Now, I love Kathleen's idea of a button concertina, but I'm not sure that it'll carry the whole song. So I'm going to use a studio string ensemble and some hand percussion as the backbone to this piece. Strings because they're flexible, expressive, and blend easily, and hand percussion because I don't know that a drum kit, a modern drum kit, is going to have the right kind of sound, but I want some rhythm to suggest that galloping of a horse. And for character, I add harp, oboe, horn, and that button concertina. Now, I could go bigger, but on a small budget, it doesn't make sense to overcomplicate things if I can achieve the same results more simply. Now, on a film, before I start orchestrating, I might sketch the whole thing in detail over maybe 6 or 7 staves. But on this project, with a smaller ensemble, I don't write down every note. I really just might write down the main ideas, the main accompaniment, any counter melodies, any joining phrases, and then I fill in the rest as I go along. Then I try a technique I learned from Hugo Montenegro, the guy who wrote the I Dream of Jeannie theme. And he used to note down all the combinations of textures he could achieve with the ensemble he's working with. So for me, it could be strings in unison, strings in octaves, strings in wide harmony, close harmony, tremolo strings, pizzicato strings, strings as background for oboe, as background for horn, harp as background for oboe, as background for horn, oboe and a horn in harmony. You get the picture. Then I decide which of those textures fits which part of the story, kind of like a puzzle, and then I start to fill in the gaps and join everything together. I also keep in mind the pop adage of simple to busy progressively, because we're building to a climax in this song. So the first verse starts very simple, just harp and voice in those 5-bar phrases.
The wind was warm and the sea tide was rising. I followed my love to the brow of the hill. I heard a song like a seabird was crying.
And then I introduce fluttery strings,
where the tide at the bar threaded into the rill,
where they continue into the second verse in a warm part of their register. Now for the third verse, I drop the strings and I introduce that button bandoneon, the concertina, because it seems to suggest that sense of fun and games of catching a horse, and this will contrast the tragedy that comes a little bit later. In verse 4, the mood turns tense, so I reintroduce the strings up high, the violins, and I have the violas and cellos tremolo a little down a bit lower. Then a bit of rising drama. To suggest he's dead. Now with only 3 choruses, I treat each one a little bit differently. For the first chorus, I keep it relatively relaxed, so we've got somewhere to go. The violas and cellos duplicate the vocal melody. And then a little bit later, I introduce the high strings, which take over, with just a little bit of the hand percussion. For the second chorus, I want a little bit more energy, so I take my cue from the words, using percussion and harp to suggest leaping into action. With more percussion and a fuller string sound, the higher strings interject a counter melody to the vocal.
and then he was gone, ride the white horse. You can master the oceans.
Now, the third chorus is the crux of the song. So instead of doing that double chorus, that triumphant double chorus I mentioned earlier, I go to the other extreme and start mournfully with pulsing strings, the oboe in a mournful mood, no percussion. And while it's a cliche, I use a chime to suggest a death knell. And I just have to hope that in this part of the song, we've earned this storytelling moment. And because I'm taking a conversational approach to the vocal as the voice of the narrator, I do 2 things here. First of all, I let the vocal echo the melody of the third chorus. Firstly for variety, but it also suggests a sense of hesitation and emotion.
Ride the white horse. You can master the ocean.
And as the performer, I almost allow myself to sob the words.
My love was enchanted, so give me no heed.
Now, in isolation, it's practically over the top, but all the way through this process, my focus has been on story. But now's the moment of truth, Kathleen's response. And I'd love to hear from you too. So at the end of this video, I'll link the full track. And tell me what you think. Does the music sound like the story? What choices might you have made differently? And whether you love it or hate it, can you see how givens might help you focus your storytelling? But back to Kathleen, because ultimately it's about the client and fulfilling the brief, as opposed to filling their briefs. Nobody wants that. It's never a good sign. But all the way through, I've focused on story. I've listened to Kathleen. I've taken note of my first impressions. I kept track of all of the givens to try to distill the idea into music. And thankfully, she likes it. Well done, me. So if you'd like me to expand on any of these techniques or break down some of my other work, do let me know. I'd love to hear. But until then, thank you so much for watching. And join me on my next project as I say, oh my God, I've forgotten how to be creative.